On the 21st of May, 1894, Empress Victoria stepped aboard her royal yacht, the Enchantress, to officially declare our Manchester Ship Canal open. Victoria's blessing marked the culmination of a long campaign by Daniel Adamson and Manchester manufacturers to revive the ailing local economy by letting cargo ships steam direct to the oceans of the world from the chimneys of Cottonopolis. Adamson's vision was also that the canal could be financed by thousands of Lancashire working people who'd take up the shares. This brave attempt at popular capitalism failed. It was London merchant banks that in the end raised the bulk of the capital. But even then the scheme was racked and nearly wrecked by scandal, extravagance and greed. The ditch would have been left half dug had not a compliant Manchester council stepped in with massive loans. Nevertheless, the opening of our ditch sparked tremendous optimism in and around Manchester. To bring sea breezes, la mer, to Salford and end all economic difficulties. The euphoria faded when commercial traffic on the canal was slow to materialise. Merchants boycotted the ditch as the railways and Liverpool docks cut their prices. Urgent action was required if the canal were not to be a white elephant. This was a task for the company manager. 2 years after the canal opened, the buccaneering Marshal Stevens struck a deal with a property developer to create the world's first industrial estate at Trafford Park. And 2 years later, the company persuaded a Hartlepool ship owner, Furniss Withy, to create a shipping line that had built its ships specifically for the canal, Manchester Liners. But profits were slow. The company had difficulty paying the interest due on its loans. Once again, voices were raised urging a municipal takeover. After a long debate, the council accepted the proposal that the loan be increased by 2 million to cover arrears of interest, and that the money owed to the council, now 7 million, could be considered loans in perpetuity. That is, the Ship Canal would not be obliged to have to pay them back. At the same time, Parliament passed a law that Manchester City councillors should always be the majority on the Ship Canal board.
The Daily Telegraph at the time said, this isn't a serious financial deal by the City Council, this is a matter of civic pride. And I think it was, and that's why people put the rates up. I also think if you read between the lines, a lot of the people who were in a company that was going bankrupt were also the aldermen and councillors on the City Council. So they were effectively lending to themselves at highly preferential rates, and they covered that up as being a matter of civic pride.
That deal done, traffic grew steadily over the next 10 years. By 1914, the Port of Manchester was handling more than 5 million tonnes of cargo. The following year, ordinary shareholders at last received their first dividend. After the First World War, tonnages fell. By 1921, back to just 3 million. The answer came in diversifying into oil. The company developed its facilities at Stanlow, down at the Liverpool end. That would keep the money rolling in for many years to come. Manchester Liners developed trade up the St. Lawrence Seaway to the Great Lakes, brought work to the docks in Salford. Its ships were a curiosity, known throughout the ports of the world for being red and custom built to fit the contours of the ditch. After the Second World War, trade took off spectacularly. Tonnage trebled.
Prior to Suez, we had 4 halcyon years in which we handled more volume of traffic than any other port in the United Kingdom except London. The oil dock at Easton, of course, was the was a huge project when it first came out. It cost £6 million to build the dock itself without any equipment at all, which in the late 40s was a very large sum of money. One of the great attractions about oil, of course, is pumpable. You don't need any labour, other than for rigging flexible hoses and that sort of thing. Its volume, of course, was terribly important to the Ship Canal Company. It also meant that when there were dock workers' disputes and troubles and strikes and so on, one's whole trade wasn't stopped because oil continued to flow.
But the company's investment downstream was not matched by modernisation at the Salford and Pomona docks.
What were conditions like when you started? All hand? Rock?
All hand, yes, all handball, no mechanisation of any description. I think we had one stacker truck at 10.9. That was where the Manchester liners had in the back. That was about all the mechanisation they had on the docks.
Manchester dockers worked. They had to. Only fast turnaround could persuade tight-fisted ship owners to take the 6 hours up the canal, turn and back down the tight ditch again.
What were labour relations like?
Nil between men and the Ship Canal.
Nil?
Yeah, nil. It was only when Devon came in that we got anything like anything reasonable conditions, you know, as regarding washing facilities, reasonable toilets.
The company controlled a small empire, which Salford docks were just one part. It operated the largest private railway in the United Kingdom and its own police force. But the success of the 1950s could not be maintained, despite pioneering work by the major port user.
If you look at the efforts of Manchester liners in the 1960s and 70s to actually survive with a container terminal in the heart of Manchester, ultimately it was doomed to failure because you couldn't achieve the economy of scale that was needed with relatively small vessels sailing up and down the canal.
I think one of the problems, quite honestly, was the dock labour situation. We had a lot of labour trouble. And in fact, towards the end, we started putting our ships into Felixstowe.
The minimum wage, that's what they didn't like. They would like to iron fire dock workers back to the old tradition when they could, when they had no work, to lay them off with no pay. That was their ultimate aim, and which we've seen today with the abolition of the Dock Labour Board.
I fought for years to get it abolished, but I'd gone by the time it was abolished. And now, of course, a person engaged in dock work will make himself available any time of the day or night, any day of the week, any day of the year, and work quite heavily.
If in the 60s the docks were often in conflict, a job along the canal side was full of romance. To work for the company, a job for life.
I was working at next to the canal on the Co-op Tea warehouse, and I thought, I like them ships. I want to be with them.
Yeah. Who trained you for it then?
Oh, it was a great old guy called Charlie Ayres. Obviously, I think he's long dead by now, but
yeah.
4 or 5 gatemen. But the main one is this Charlie Ayres, I remember. Bandy-legged chap.
Just an old man taught you?
That's right,
yeah. But in those days, didn't there used to be like garden competitions and things like that?
Oh, yes, the whole of the locks were mass with flower beds.
Yeah.
And it was a thriving competition between all the locks, yes.
And now there's none of that?
No, not enough men interested in it.
In 1984, the Ship Canal Company announced its plan to close the whole of the upper reaches of the waterway from Manchester to Runcorn, along with Salford docks. Hundreds of jobs would go.
The Transport and General Workers Union and some of the other unions that were involved said that they wanted support of local authorities that had members on the board, which meant us basically, and they wanted Manchester and the leadership in Manchester to come out quite vehemently against it and support the workers basically. And there was a very, very big argument about what we should do.
We had to argue a particular case within the Ship Canal company, and all the time, because of company law, we had to bear in mind what was in the interests of the shareholders. So it became a very difficult and complicated discussion.
It's true to say that we could save a lot of money if the upper reaches had been closed to navigation. But of course, we were also a water channel. This is one of the big troubles. I mean, the whole land drainage of the vast area actually depended on the existence of the ship canal.
So they couldn't close the canal without flooding half of Cheshire. But the dockers and docks at Salford, they got rid of them.
We still believe there was a future for the ship canal, for the cargo handling. But people made other decisions. The board made other decisions to develop this dock into what we see today. Round here, I mean, it was a community. There was all families round here had some connection with the Manchester Ship Canal, and we've seen an era go now.
This is a parcel of land at Dumplington, owned by the Ship Canal Company. They've always owned more land than they needed. This 300-acre site they bought for a song to build another dock. Today it's very valuable, not because it's by the waterway, but because it's by the motorways. The big ships don't come here now. It's the land the company owns that's the key to their future.
During the 1980s, the canal came to the attention of a secretive man from Rochdale who'd been buying up old mills in Bury, John Whittaker.
The Ship Canal Company in those days was seen as a company on the decline, and the real potential hadn't then been realised.
But he'd spotted it.
He'd spotted it early.
Yeah, and you could see it as well.
Oh, we could see it. And yes, it was clear.
The tactics employed by Whittaker were impeccable. He realised that although the preference shares were only half the value of the ordinary shares, and there was no real market for them, because he realised that they carried equal voting rights, he was able to buy up preference shares.
Ironically, Mr. Whittaker's banker, closely advising him, was the very same bank that had written that issue of the preference shares 100 years previously.
It looked a fascinating opportunity. And it was an undermanaged business, and it looked extremely interesting. He very quickly cottoned on to the fact that the preference shares, which stood in the market at a very substantial discount to the ordinary shares, were, in voting terms, as valuable as the ordinary shares.
So it wasn't Rothschild?
It was, no, it wasn't Rothschild.
It was Whittaker?
It was Whittaker himself, yes. I mean, he identified the opportunity.
Lock competition were Latchford locks. To collect the prize on behalf of that lock, Senior Lockmaster Al Hannon.
The company's style of management was traditional, increasingly out of tune with the rougher business ethos of the 1980s, and a soft target for Rochdale man.
Were you caught napping at all? No, not a bit of it. Not a bit of it. We knew what he was up to.
And you wanted to fight him?
Absolutely, we did fight him for long enough.
Why did you want to fight him?
Because we didn't think it was in the interests of the shareholders of the Ship Canal Company that we should be part of any other organisation. We weren't interested in being part of another show. We wanted to run our own show.
Canals, Eastham. Hi, Tom. We're still trying to find out from this Gordon Thomas as to where he's going yet, as soon as I get an answer.
The Ship Canal Company then found another player, buying up loads of shares, this time from London.
Thanks, now.
With money made out of dictionaries and a family interest in the Daily Telegraph. Nicholas Berry stepped on board.
I thought they were doing a valiant job, but they had become rather conservative and were perhaps looking at the company purely in terms of a public utility and not in terms of what it could earn in profit or the possibilities from being such a large landowner in the northwest.
The struggle for the company was becoming intense. John Whittaker found his progress blocked by yet another curiosity written into the original constitution, designed to give small shareholders some voting advantage.
Now, this situation led to a ridiculous process known as unbundling. When each side had got large holdings, they each tried then to put their shares in the hands of nominees in packets of 10 each, so that if you got 1,000 shares, instead of having sort of 20 votes, you'd turn it into 100 votes.
He got hold of a large amount of canvassers and sent them round housing estates, offering people £1 notes if they would sign a transfer form to vote in his favour.
I think Nicholas Berry threatened to sort of sign up all the local Sunday League footballers in Manchester, so it became necessary for both sides to seek to obtain proxies.
The result was a vast number of complaints to the company by people who thought they were signing a petition or whatever.
I asked him why we had to sign it 3 times, and he said, well, in effect, you've been a shareholder for 2 seconds.
They've just duped us. I mean, we thought we were signing a petition to keep jobs local, and in actual fact, all we've done is help them gain control.
I recognise the split-down potential, and that wasn't a loophole in the law, that was the law. It wasn't a question of finding some circuitous or devious way forward. That is a legal position, I recognise that, and therefore we split down.
John Whittaker was advancing, but still shunned by the board. To replace as chairman, the old patrician Donald Redford, now came old Etonian Nicholas Berry.
I knew from the moment I became chairman that Whittaker was going to get control of the company. But I also knew that I could prevent him getting 100% ownership of it, that eventually those shareholders who stayed would benefit handsomely.
Though by 1987's AGM, a simple majority of shares were in John Whittaker's pocket, it was not enough to give him full control.
That gave him a right to a seat on the board, representing the shareholders of the company. Manchester City Council then still exercised their own control on the board, and they had, of course, in those days, 11 directors on the board.
All those years when we thought the big ditch was ours and it wasn't, did the City Council never debate in our lifetime putting it properly, securely in municipal control?
To be truthful, no. The only time that sort of got half a mention was during this time when the trade unions had asked us over the closure of the upper reaches. But there was nobody really suggesting that we had either the cash or the inclination.
Because it was bailed out in the 19th century and early 20th century by the City Council, because we were known to have a majority on the board, it was always assumed that we owned the Ship Canal Company in some way. And of course, the City Council has never owned a single share.
Although the council had made the loans in perpetuity, so could not expect repayment, John Whittaker now so wanted complete control, he was prepared to make an offer he was sure they'd not refuse.
We didn't pay the money back to get rid of them. We agreed a mutually satisfactory deal where each party gained something from that arrangement. They received £7 million in repayment of their debentures, and we obtained clean board control.
But the reason we actually accepted what was a very good financial deal in its own right was it was becoming increasingly obvious that there was the City Council's interest was no longer having a majority on the board of a ship canal company, that was improving its financial performance. And our interest was really to get that money out, use it to invest in economic schemes in Manchester, and avoid the direct conflicts that there were bound to be and were beginning to felt at that time.
If I was sat there now, to persuade me to go with it, I'd want a lot more than £7 million. I think it was a pittance what we got.
Despite having board control and a majority of shares, John Whittaker needed to own 75% in both categories of shares, ordinary and preference, to be able to use the assets of the ship canal for his purposes. Nicholas Berry, the hard core of small shareholders, were fully aware of the huge potential profits to be made from developing the site at Dumplington. They also knew that John Whittaker's companies were mounting debts, they decided to let him sweat.
Imagine a safe with 2 keys. The outside shareholders had one, and Whittaker had the other, but it required 2 keys to open the safe. So until he could unlock the asset value of the canal and use it in his own companies, it was as though he didn't own any of the company.
I mean, he hung on and he hung on until he forced John Whittaker to pay the price that he, Nicholas Berry, wanted for his shares. Indeed, when the final formula for ending this long-running corporate dispute, one of the longest corporate disputes in Britain, when the formula was eventually put together to end it, Nicholas Berry was the one who thought it up.
It meant that shareholders who held the preference shares would receive 10 times the value of their preference shares in only 6 years before, and those who held the ordinary shares would receive 5 times the value 6 years before. So I felt it was a reasonable settlement and justified my attitude from the beginning.
With Nicholas Berry out the way, control was complete for John Whittaker. The reclusive Rochdalian was unfettered, and he could now develop the company the way he wanted.
And what he wanted was to absorb the canal into his property company, Peel Holdings. No more Ship Canal shares. The company begun by Daniel Adamson in 1885 had lost its independence.
I don't see the name Manchester Ship Canal ever disappearing. I've no knowledge of, no reason to say that, but I just don't think it would do. I mean, it would be rather hard to sort of talk about Peel Ship Canal, for instance, wouldn't it?
It hasn't got the same status, has it?
No.
Ironically, the operations of the Port of Manchester are now concentrated in the lower reaches of the canal, often not a spit away from Liverpool, the port the canal was built to bypass. For the rest of it, the future is no longer in labouring docks to take Manchester-made goods across the high seas, but in out-of-town shopping that threatens the heart of city centre Manchester. And Adamson's dream is quite forgot.
Such a bold vision, though, to let the oceans of the world flow up to kiss the shores of Salford. Such a brave idea the founders had, to try and raise new prosperity to this wet corner of England from the pockets of the people. And we almost did it. But clever money won. Not once, but twice. Shilling for shilling, the lion's share of profit. I'll not say we were diddled, but People's Canal, it's a caution that needs to be told. We made it, and it's made us what we are.